our team is 50% or, around 50-50, both on assets and team members in North and South America.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have had time enough to have some lunch. We are ready to start our afternoon event, which will goes on until 7 p.m. today. And our panelists are already on the table, and we do have one panelist participating from online. So I'd like to welcome everybody again. And for those who are joining us now, welcome and thanks for choosing our event this afternoon. I'd like to introduce to you my boss, José Carlos da Fonseca Jr. He is the Executive Director of the Brazilian tree industry. And with that, I trust that he will present our panelists of this session. I'd like to remind you that this session is being translated, so I kindly ask the panelists to speak slowly, and I wish everyone a very nice session.
Thank you very much, Natalia. Not really a boss, a colleague from IBA, the Brazilian tree industry, and we are very proud to have you here today as our MC. And thank you all for having us, for hosting this session. The two morning panels were very interesting, and we hope to keep up the same good quality in these discussions ahead of us. So now we will devote our attention to forest sector and ecosystem restoration. The private sector can bring significant contributions to ecosystem restoration. A few forest companies are already engaged in ecosystem conservation and restoration and do develop operational and financing approaches for successful restoration. Despite this, it is noted that forest-based companies are generally not well represented as official partners within global and regional ecosystem restoration initiatives. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration may represent a new opportunity for the private sector to increase their visibility and their engagement in ecosystem restoration. A recent analysis shows that ecosystem restoration can be part of a business rationale for the private forest sector, and that it can provide multiple benefits and mitigate climate risks, among others. Ecosystem restoration also appears to be a good ally for long-term sustainable supply of wood and non-wood forest products, as well as forest ecosystem services, key ingredients for a circular forest-based bioeconomy. In this context, this session we are beginning now, will give the floor to thought-provoking presentations about the contributions the private sector can make to ecosystem restoration. It will provide the opportunity for key stakeholders involved in connecting the private forest sector with ecosystem restoration to share their views and ideas on how to best catalyze engagement of forest-based companies in this very important endeavor of ecosystem restoration. We have a very rich and stellar panel of speakers here today, and I will start by presenting our first speaker, Mr. Garo Bantmanian, Global Lead for Forests, Landscapes, and Biodiversity at the World Bank. Among other responsibilities, Garo is the World Bank focal point on the Collaborative Partnership on Forests, CPF, and the chair of the Finance Task Force of the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration Initiative. Garo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Fonseca. It's a pleasure to be back in this room, but it's a pleasure to participate in this session. I want to we agreed that I'll go first because what I want to do is basically, in a short time, put the context of what we're talking about, ecosystem restoration, so that we can better understand where the private sector can fit in. So I'm just going to make a very quick presentation on the continuum of ecosystem restoration as we see it, as part of the UN Decade for Restoration. May I have the next slide, please? So what is ecosystem restoration? This is what the UN, the World Bank is a partner, is a core partner of the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration, and I represent the bank in this initiative, and I also chair a task force on the financing ecosystem restoration for this, the UN Decade initiative. So the definition that we have at the UN Decade is, it means assisting in the recovery of ecosystems that have been degraded or destroyed, as well as conserving the ecosystems that are still intact. Restoring is, the first part is very important, that we cannot keep restoring, if at one point we don't also protect and conserve, because then it's always trying to catch up, right? Restoration is critical to efforts to address converging environmental crisis, climate change, biodiversity, and ecosystem services, and to achieve the SDGs. We heard that a lot yesterday. Now, what does that exactly mean? I can show you in the next slide. The society, next slide? Okay. The Society of Ecological Restoration has come up with what we call the restorative continuum. It says restoration follows reduced impact, remediation, rehabilitation, and ecological restoration. And I want you to notice that only the far right part of it, fully recovering native ecosystems, means trying to bring back as it was before, All the other ones are not like that. And that's where I think most of the private sector can work on. For our purposes, restoration starts on where I put an arrow on the rehabilitation part, which is repairing ecosystem functions. Because if you restore a forest, at least that forest should be providing the part of the ecosystem services that was providing before. Once you start doing that, we call it restoration, even if you don't have all the species, even if you don't have... So if you look at from there forward, repairing, initiating, partially recovering, fully recovering, you can have plantation, you can have mixed plantation, you can have agroforestry. All those activities, depending on the assemblage of species you use and the practices that you use, can qualify and will qualify, or I should say do qualify, as ecosystem restoration. So I'm begging you to not consider ecosystem restoration as this was a rainforest and I have to bring it back exactly to what the rainforest was before. So in this continuum, there is a room for us to work the investment and the economic part that the private sector can make of it. The other aspect that I want to talk about is an example that we have in Ethiopia, if I can have the next slide. Well, before I get, they also have the 10 principles that underpin the UN Decade of Restoration, which is basically that it's scalable, that we talk with others, that that we have activities, so it's not like somebody imposing top-down. And I want to go to the left corner, which is knowledge integration and measurable goals. If we are saying we're restoring for ecosystem services, we better know and report that which ones we're doing for. So it's important to have those. Next slide, please. So I'm giving you an example on the World Bank project that we have on sustainable landscape management in Ethiopia, because that's one of the things that I feel that the private sector and us, together with the private sector, can think about. When you have a program or large land holding, you don't plant everywhere. Sometimes you do it a restoration in the same property you have, and I know 500,000 hectare properties in the Amazon. Some places you do reforestation. Some places you do restoration. Some places you do forest planting, and some places you do forest management. And that's part of an integrated landscape use. So in this case, in Ethiopia, we are looking at the jurisdictional scale. And I want to point out that we have a program there that with the government and the companies and the communities, we apply landscape management to 1.1 million hectares. Only 180,000 of it is land restored. But then you have another one, is 123,000 of forest that was already there, but now is under management. So it's not an either or. You do this as a combination, and all of them become economically viable. And if you see, nearly 3.3 million hectares have a certificate for the communities that are managing the land, and they have the land. So this gives an idea that you have to have this broader view. So in this particular project, we improve the climate resilience, the land productivity, the carbon storage, increase access to diversified livelihood activities, and then everything is started with a structural issue, which is securing land titles, because otherwise the community, nobody plans long-term if you don't have control over the resource, and that's basic. That's part of what we do. But this gives you the idea, I'm going to wrap up again, that there is a continuum. Part of the continuum goes from activities that are economically viable, and they fit in a landscape, and you have a mix of activities that can work. So when you look at the categories of sustainable finance, you see there is a piece that is part of the interface between biodiversity finance and climate finance. So it's, of course, green finance. With that, next slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Garo. Very interesting and indeed thought-provoking presentation. We'll now pass on to Mr. Esben Brandy, who is the head of business development at BTG Pactual. Esben has 20-plus years of experience in global timberland investment. Very nice to have you here, Esben. You have the floor.
Thank you, Carlos. My name is Esben. I'm a forester, and I work for. Huh? Cool. So my name is Esben. I'm a forester. I work for Timberland Investment Group, which is a subsidiary of BTG Pactual, Latin America's biggest investment bank. We specialize in forestry asset management. We do that on behalf of institutional investors, pension funds, insurance companies, trusts, endowments. These institutions have been focused on traditional timberland return characteristics, stable returns, diversification, and we manage today around 1 million hectares of forests across the Americas, half of it in Latin America, and $4.5 billion under management on behalf of these investors. So you can think, why take a money guy focused on providing an appropriate return from sustainably managed forest to talk about restoration? Because traditional restoration has a very limited opportunity for economic return, or at least that's a perceived notion. So why me? And I'd like to provide 4 important arguments for why I think restoration is important to an investment strategy and can complement those strategies. And let me start off with providing an example. We are developing a strategy in Latin America. We are collaborating with Conservation International, the big green NGO, where we are seeking to deploy capital on behalf of these institutional investors at scale. At scale, $1 billion scale, a scale that is meaningful for the planet, for biodiversity, and for climate mitigation, but also relevant to the investors. because to many of these very large institutional investors, they don't have the ability and manpower to do very small investments. So we need to find something that is relevant to them, but can be done at scale. So the strategy that we are developing now is essentially a strategy where we are buying degraded and unproductive cattle farms and cattle pasture. There's unfortunately more than 150 million hectares of these types of cattle farms across the continent, most of it from deforested areas, and they don't provide much economic activity. There's not much investment into them. So what we will do is that we will buy them from rich people, from dentists, whoever just sit with this and doesn't invest in these farms. And then we convert them to sustainable tree farms focused on developing the basis and the natural resources to develop a green economy from forestry products. Everybody here understands the importance of forestry products to transition into a green economy. So we would develop these highly efficient plantations which will sequester carbon out of the atmosphere in an incredibly efficient manner. And that we will do on half of the footprint, half of the farm. And on the other half, we will restore and allow the natural forest to come back by itself. We will take away the cattle, we will fence it off, we will maybe take away some of the invasive African grass that has been planted by the cattle farmers, and we allow the forest to rehabilitate. We will probably have to do some work, but luckily for many of these ecosystems, we don't need to do that much. And then we will both have the opportunity to develop green economy, but also to restore and facilitate the restoration of the ecosystem. So that's what we are planning to do. And so why the restoration part? Doesn't provide us with much economic activity. It doesn't provide income, doesn't provide many jobs. So let me go to the four arguments. So first argument is we have investors out there that is now demanding business not as usual. We have more than $10 trillion committed to become net zero. We heard earlier today, some $8 billion committed to stop deforestation in their supply chains and investments. We have a number of investors that now are committing to becoming nature positive. And all of this, they demand investment opportunities that have positive co-benefits alongside appropriate returns, but also addressing climate change. So it's an investor need and an opportunity for us as managers to develop strategies that fits these return characteristics and wider societal goals of the investors that we serve. Second argument is risk mitigation and our license to operate. If we don't address restoration and legitimate biodiversity and societal needs for a resilient environment where nature can allow its natural place to redevelop, where community can get co-benefits from the restored natural forest, we're in a situation where we don't have a license to operate. And without that license to operate, we sit with a significant risk. Taking it a little bit to the extreme, it only takes a match. And our entire investments of billions of dollars in freshly developed, beautiful tree plantations is up in smoke. We do a lot, and our investors would maybe be a little bit afraid, but we do a lot to mitigate natural occurring fires and everything that we do, fire breaks and everything. But if you don't have the local license to operate, you are at a significant risk. So that's that's the second argument. The third argument is it actually reduces the restoration costs incredibly much. If we take a standalone restoration project, you have to set up the fire breaks, you have to take away the cattle, you have to monitor, you have to have fire towers, you have to have fences, you have to have people running around looking that there's no legal activity going on. All of that is very expensive. But we will do all of those things in our commercial tree farms, anyhow. We will have fire towers to look after our plantations. We will probably have some of those restoration areas inside our forests, so we don't need the fences, because it's naturally fenced by our plantations. We will have people coming to our tree farms every day, every other week, so we don't have those additional guard costs. So altogether, I think if we're looking at cash cost per hectare dollar restored, it might be a fifth or 10th of a standalone forest restoration project done only, and that excludes the cost of the land. So if we take the cost we have and the cost they have, it's very, very small compared to if we integrate it with our forest operations. And then maybe the last point is actually good for our returns as well. Because since this is a reforestation strategy and a restoration strategy, we are developing carbon credits and carbon revenues because we are sucking enormous amount of carbon out of the atmosphere, both from our restored forest, but also from our very efficient tree farms, which is essentially the world's best carbon capture machine by far. So we generate lots of carbon credits that we wish to sell, and a lot of the people that wants to buy these carbon credits, they're focused on high integrity carbon credits at scale, but with very high integrity. And most importantly, with significant co-benefits. And if we have the combination of restoration and reforestation with a focus on green jobs, tax revenues, we have the ability to actually get both and sell those combined carbon credits at a premium price. So that's why it makes a lot of sense to us to develop restoration in combination with our reforestation projects. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Esben. Very interesting presentation. It shows that it pays off to engage in restoration. It's good business, it's good for nature, it's good for people. Very interesting. Now we'll go to our third speaker, Ms. Nelly Ndvluvu, who is online. There she is. Nelly has a long history of working in the paper and forest industry in various managerial positions. Welcome, Nelly. You have the floor.
Good morning, South African time, and I think it's afternoon time on your side. It's good to hear the speakers talking about ecosystem restoration, and today I'm going to be sharing about how we are contributing to economic restoration in ecosystem restoration within Mondi, South Africa, within our South African landscape. So I'm going to start off by just giving you a little bit of an overview about our South African forestry industry, and I'm not going to be long, just to paint a picture. Forestry products contribute about 4.5% of the total manufacturing. In fact, this has tripled in 10 years, and we're now about 25% of the agricultural GDP. It is estimated that South African industry is contributing or employs about 62,000 people. And that also relates to about 20,000 small-scale timber growers within South Africa. In forestry is quite well regulated in a sense that we've got Forestry South Africa, which is an association representing about 93% of the industry players. And what's nice about that is that we collaborate in terms of common issues such as research and development, pests and diseases, amongst other things, including education, training, and legislation. And the pictures they are just showing basically the extent and the landscape within forestry. If you go to our second slide, so how are we doing this as Mondi Zimele, or as part of a fully integrated company called Mondi South Africa? Because we're in the forest, pulp and paper in this space. Our objectives really are to develop and support emerging forestry landowners, timber farmers, but in particular, because forestry is in a rural landscape, we're wanting to grow and really support small-scale timber growers, whilst making sure that we're facilitating sustainable market access and therefore contributing towards job creation and development. And we do this by providing a number of services. And these include supporting our small-scale growers by giving them seedlings, firefighting management, and various other forestry extension support. However, this is not without any challenges. One of the key challenges is that we seem to have a lot of unproductive and poorly performing plantations. And that's really because of lack of government support. It's mainly the corporates that are supporting your private farmers as well as your small timber scale growers. We also, because we're in the tropical space in the southern region, we are suffering from a lot of pest diseases and fires. And obviously the small growers do not have the capability nor the infrastructure to be able to handle this. So which means that they tend to rely on forestry corporates a lot. There's also a lack of agroforestry initiation. And like I said earlier, lack of funding support, with only us being the provider and support. That being said, there are opportunities. Right now, we're busy working with CMO as part of the restoration exercise to increase the certification in terms of FSC certification within our small growers. We are trying to make sure that there's diversification within forestry, in a sense that because this is the source of income in a third world environment, which is requiring a lot of support in terms of jobs and income and all of that. We're trying to stimulate agroforestry so that people can make income and also be able to secure food, whilst at the same time making sure that our forestry is available and is being grown so that it is sustainable. We also provide support such as funding and various other blended finance opportunities. And what has resulted in our support in terms of our forestry development is that we now have 3,362 growers on the program who are managing about 14,700 hectares. And those growers really have an average size in terms of hectares of between 0.2 to about 10 hectares. And what we're able to do successfully is then we're able to secure fiber of about 100,000 tons per annum, which then comes back onto stream. And what's nice about that is then the small scale growers are able to generate income, which can be in the millions. And also we're now stimulating smaller businesses by making sure that we now have harvesting, transport, security companies that are able to look after this plantation. And we really believe that this approach and this model, if properly funded, could go a long way in making sure that we restore the ecosystem that we need to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nelly. Very interesting presentation to complement the first two others. And we have seen here from different perspectives and angles that complement each other, how nice an opportunity we have when we discuss and study and get deeper and deeper into ecosystem restoration. So I appreciate, we won't have, unfortunately, time for Q&A, but I'm sure that our panelists here will be open to receiving afterwards questions and inquiries of any sort. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Congratulations, you guys. And let's now come to a closing and back to Natalia.
Thank you very much.